Hi there, Life Shifters. My name is Maureen Atkinson. I'm founder of Lifeshiift, a community of women seeking purpose and adventure in later life. And one fact many of us will experience, including me, is the loss of a spouse. My guest today, Kathleen Rehl, found herself in just such a situation. I first heard of Kathleen from the newsletter 60andMe, and since have become a fan just because of her amazing positive attitude. Kathleen has transitioned from being a successful financial advisor to writing a book for widows, Moving Forward on Your Own, a financial guidebook for widows. But she hasn't stopped there. She's made several shifts: widow, author, speaker, advisor. So she is the ultimate life shifter. But I'm going to let her tell you her stories. So Kathleen, tell me just before we get started on some of your favorite topics, give me a little background. Tell us about your journey.
All right, and I'd like to do that with a poem that I wrote. I actually wrote this over a year ago. It's a short poem, and I've called this Resume, Story of Origins from My Heart. Once upon a time, a baby girl was born in a faraway land called Wisconsin during a blustery blizzard. Her parents named their child Kathleen. That was me, and this is my story. Childhood on family farms, constant chores, caring for animals, crops, and catastrophes, squabbling parents, money was short, receiving valedictorian scholarship, being the family's first college grad. Ooh, was that your escape? Public schools teaching, wiggly first graders and sassy teens, studying for the PhD at the same time, defending my thesis, opening new doors with that golden key. I thought you loved being a school teacher. Hello, university faculty status. Diving into academic teaching, fast-track tenuring, changing abruptly, pivoting, leaving ivory tower colleagues. Ooh, how could you go? New challenges at nonprofits, urging folks to open their hearts and wallets, raising money for charities, learning new skills, making a difference. Was that the game changer? Real financial advisors. Flourishing 18-year business as CFP, helping folks with money, focusing on surviving spouses after husband's death. Publishing Moving Forward on Your Own, a financial guidebook for widows. Well, what came next? Encore Career launched. Selling RFA business, speaking, writing, researching, empowering widows, crisscrossing country for 300 presentations. Then you retired? Now refired, not vintage retirement. Centering on 5 F words: family, fun, focus, purpose, friends, and fitness, body, mind, spirit, and money. Creating as a legacy writer and nonprofit advocate. Fantastic chapter. So that's an overview covering
and it doesn't end there. To be continued, I'm sure.
Covering my 77 years.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, let's focus in a little bit on your book first, because I think that is a lot of the people who are part of Lifeshiift are widows. So the kind of key messages that you'd like to give or that you've given in your book?
First of all, the book was not created to be Finance 101, to teach absolutely everything. In fact, at the time that I wrote the book, there was another financial book out there for widows, and it was about this thick and weighed over a pound, I think. And I used to give it to my widowed clients, but they give it right back to me and say, this is just too big, it's too much. I can't deal with this right now. They were in the early grief stage of widowhood, when a lot of widows refer to that as a jello brain time. Your cognitive thinking has changed. So anyway, I wanted to create this book that was more about giving women more confidence in working with money, in finances. And it includes a lot of places. It's kind of like a workbook. There's places for the widow to do exercises together and to share and to talk about her confidence. And then there are a few little snippets. And the book is it's short. In fact, when I was getting the book published, some of the publishers I approached said, oh, it's not long enough. It needs to be 200 pages long. And this book is, I think it's 80. And I said, well, I don't want to overwhelm the widows. There's lots of beautiful original art, just like women are beautiful. And I want them to open the book and look at the art and to connect with that and read the inspirational quotes. And then each of the chapters are really only 1 or 2 pages long. So she can open the book any place and start reading it and put it down and pick it up the next day. And maybe it's the next page, or maybe it's the previous page.
And what are some of those messages that you think widows need to absorb? Yeah. And where do they come from? Is this from your experience, from talking to widows? What is the
Comes from, yes, my experience also working with many widows. After my husband died, I really specialized in working with surviving spouses as one of the 2 main niches that I worked with. So I had a lot of client experience. And then there is also the research that we did. There was a team of us from several universities and widows organizations that did 2 major studies that resulted in 5 published pieces. So it grows from my own experience and the client's experience and working with widows and studying this whole field. There was a period that I was on the road. I was speaking about widowhood. And like, for example, there was like big mistakes that widows often make. And one of the biggest mistakes is moving too quickly and believing that they need to get all kinds of things done quickly. There are some things that have to be done right away, like the funeral, obviously. But there are some things like repositioning investments to be more appropriate for the widow versus when she was in a couple relationship. That shouldn't happen right away when she's in this deep grief, because she's not really thinking straight. It needs to be later on. It's also being aware of financial wolves that are out there, because there are predators that specifically look to working with widows, especially ones that did not have relationships with prior financial advisors. And they may be sold products and services that they don't really need.
I know that you do go through the sort of stages of widowhood in your book. Can you kind of describe those? Because I think they help transition to and what happens in each of them.
The first stage is that really heavy grief. And it's a time when the widow needs to, I like to use the term grief, growth, and grace for the 3 stages. So this is the time of
Oh,
grief.
wow, that's great.
She really needs to focus on self-care and doing the basic kinds of things that she needs to, but not making big decisions, such as, oh, I'm going to move. You know, if she walks into the living room and there's that big blue chair that Bob used to fall asleep in every night, and she knows he's never going to be there again, and she says, I just can't stand being alone in this house anymore. And my son has asked me to come and live with him, and that's where I'm going to go. After the stage of grief, and that first stage can last anywhere from 6 months to a year. On average, it was about a year for most of my clients, but some it was earlier. It depends in part on the circumstances of death. It's a time to be real careful with her health, because it's not uncommon for widows to get sick or even develop cancer. It's in part because the immune system is not functioning quite the way it was before. So anyway, after they move from grief to growth, and that's where they're able to handle more regular kinds of financial issues, such as looking at where the investments are to see that they're in appropriate places that fit them now, rather than at when they were married. There may have been some things that were more appropriate. And I work primarily with mature widows, I should say, as opposed to real young widows. And the average age that a wife becomes a widow is 59. I was 60 when my husband died. But there are women who are widowed in their 20s and 30s. But most of the women that I worked with were mature widows that were about my age. So they can do some investment things. They can do basic updating of estate planning, looking at insurance kinds of issues.
You have a stat on the number of widows in and this is for the US, but it's certainly I think scale wise, but how many new widows are there in a year?
If you look at this, the Census Bureau, it's about a million. There's about 15 million widowed persons out there, but 3/4 of them
Wow.
women. And along this line of statistics, it's like it's 80% of the women when they die, they're going to be single. They're widowed, have experienced widowhood, or they never married, or they divorced. But 80% of the men, when they die, they will be married because the women are going before them. And 70% of all women who are married are going to experience widowhood during their lifetime. And if they remarry after being widowed once, there's a very high probability they're going to be widowed again. And that's in part because women oftentimes marry someone who's a little bit older than they are, and life expectancy of women is longer than it is for the guys.
So I think what you're doing is incredible, and it is an incredible service because there's just, it's such a prevalent kind of situation, especially for women at our age, our stage of life, for sure. But I'll let you get back to, you were talking about that second stage where
Yes,
sort of
the
coming out of the fog, I guess, if you like.
growth. And I should also say that, do all widows go from that first stage to the second stage? Unfortunately, not. There are some, smaller amount, but they're referred to as being stuck in widowhood. And oftentimes these are the very mature women who were joined at the hip with their husband. They just did absolutely everything. And they may be ones who died of a broken heart. And that really is a medical condition. It's cardiomyopathy, I believe is what the medical term is. And you've read stories where one spouse dies,
Sure.
and it's just a matter of days or even hours, and the second spouse is
Yeah.
gone. So not all widows do make it from grief to growth, but the majority do. Right, the third stage, and that takes a while to get to. In fact, I wrote in my journal, I think it was about the fifth year, I wrote in my journal, I said, I am so much more than a widow. I am an independent woman. So it took me 5 years to get there. And talking with a number of other widows, it's a number of years. And that's for the widows who make it onto this grace stage, and some may also like to call it transformation. That's when like a whole new life can blossom. There can be new passions, new purposes, new people, new interests. Oftentimes, philanthropy, charitable giving is a part. Legacy work, where writing our legacy stories. This is an exciting time, and it's really when many widows blossom. Some widows decide that they want to maintain their status as a widow. Some remarry. Some enter relationships where they decide that the ring isn't necessary for them to be together. In fact, after my husband died, it was a while before I really seriously started dating again. And I dated for many years, and I did remarry, but it was after we were together, I think it was about 8 years, and decided, okay, it'd be all right to get remarried.
I have to say, from personal experience, I think, I can see that. I can see that there is that fog where you just kind of keep thinking that this really isn't real, and I'm going to wake up and one
Yes.
day and and we're going to be just doing what we always did. But also now I see myself in that later stage, and I think for new widows, and I do remember asking people when I was first widowed, how long is this going to take? Because that's all I could think of. It was just, is this my life now? Is this how I'm always going to feel? And I have said to people, it's really good to talk to people who've gone through it and really hear, how they do it. And I think it's good speaking to women. I find men have a different kind of approach to it, but I love your you have more of a female approach to it. Let me put it that way.
That's another statistic too. After widowhood, the guys remarry a lot faster. They oftentimes, like within 2 years, they will remarry. Whereas the widows that were in our research study, it was several years before they considered remarriage. And if they did remarry at all, it definitely took longer. And I've been asked that question, well, why do you think it is? Why do you think the guys remarry so quickly? And I don't have research on this, but it's my feeling that they just don't know how to function without a wife, especially if they've been married a long time. Plus, because there are less widowers than widows, the guys are chased more. In fact, there's
there's more opportunity. I think you're right. I think there's more opportunity for men. Do you have sort of like, your top 5 tips for widows?
Well, that one about not jumping in right away. Early on, when a widow would work with me, I would just talk to her about what her concerns were, and she would get everything out. Like, what do I do with the car? How do I change title, or what do I do with it, or how do I collect the insurance, or do I have to go back to work, or whatever her concerns were. I would get those down, and then we would split things into now, soon, and later kinds of tasks, so that she could focus on just a few things at a time that were most relevant. And every time I would meet with her, I'd have her, we'd go through the now, soon, later, and that would become her go-to sheet that she would look at. We would just work on the things that she felt were very, very important, and then the things that I felt were important too. Like when it got to the stages on it, and I'm a financial planner, on the investments, oftentimes the mature, my age widow was very much aware of like daily household in and out kind of money and what was at the bank, but didn't have an understanding of what the overall investments were, like if they had individual retirement account or an annuity someplace, or of where they were located and what it was invested in and how it all fit together in a profile. So it's going through the and updating the estate plans and making changes that need to be made. And I talk about working with an advisor because the research that we did was the Widow's Voice. That was the very first piece. It showed that women were more confident who were working with financial planners, and they were even more, like, doubly feeling good about their finances if these were advisors that dealt with what I call like the softer side of advising, where they listened, they had great communication skills, rather than just saying do this, do that, but explaining and really listening to the widow. Felt much more confident about their finances than those who were winging it and doing it on their own.
I really love the approach of what needs to be done right now, what is next, and then what can happen later. I think that is just say that again. I know you said it very well.
Now, soon, later. So she doesn't feel like she's got everything to deal with all at once and just gets paralyzed.
And that feeling of overwhelm is something that's very hard to handle when everything is happening.
A second study that we did, in fact, I'm just looking at what we had titled this, Helping Repartnered Widows Navigate Romance and Finance, the Role of Financial Advice. That was fascinating. And that included many facets, but one of them was widows who had remarried or repartnered in a committed relationship. The advice they gave new widows who were also considering repartnering. And some of it was sad, the things that had happened to these widows. But that resulted in a couple of publications. One of them was 10 questions to ask your widowed clients who repartner. And I think that was one piece that I wrote a similar article on this for 60andMe. That's how you found me. So I think that
well, it was your refirement that got me going. That article on not vintage retirement, refirement. So I think we'll wrap up now, but this has been really fascinating, and just for any of you who are looking for information, Kathleen's email address is her name @gmail.com.
When I do these interviews and talks, there's always at least one person that reaches out to me and says, "Oh, would you please be my financial planner? I want you to work with me." But I gave up that registration, and I no longer do that anymore. So I can't be your financial planner. You could read lots.
Okay, but you have tons of great information on your website
All
that
free.
anybody can get for free. Exactly, exactly.
Well, I so appreciate you talking with me today and you lifting up other women who have made or are making or who are thinking about making these life shifts.
Well, you certainly are an ultimate life shifter in my mind. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for joining us, and I really appreciate your wisdom.
If you liked this video, give us a thumbs up. Better still, press the subscribe button below.